So perhaps we could begin with listening to 3 sounds of the bell. Is there's Annie or Adriana or Rachel, anyone have a bell handy? Great. So welcome. It's a delight to see everyone, old friends and new friends alike. Welcome. Thank you, Annie, and thank you, Adriana, for creating these very important series of discussions and bringing the community together. And of course, Rachel for her technical support. And is it Don who's doing closed caption? So thank you so much. And most of all, thank you for being here. So our focus for tonight is how to fight, parentheses, injustice without hating. So I have to say, the title for this talk, How to Fight Injustice Without Hating, is not mine. So there's a little story here. Before the murder of George Floyd, I attended a gathering of more than 600 Black and Brown Indigenous people that was curated by the mindfulness app Liberate. Liberate is an app designed for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as for Black, Asian, and ethnic minority, or what is now being called the global majority. So Liberate, they're fabulous people. And the speaker that night was Ruth King, and she was amazing. You know, she sang to us. She was just doing her Ruth King thing. And then somewhere along in that evening, in the chat, in this stream of maybe 100 chats, somebody asked the question, how do you fight injustice? No, the word injustice wasn't there. How do you fight without hating? That was like buried in the chat. How do you fight without hating? And at first it was like an intellectual thing. Yeah, you know, my mind was spinning, like, how do you fight without hating? And then from this intellectual grasping at the question, that question, like a koan, kind of settled into my chest and in my heart. And so I want to extend a deep bow to the person who offered that beautiful koan, how to fight without hating. So this is about how to handle strong emotions like outrage, anger, sadness, maybe even contempt. And the very hard work of racial and social justice. And I know on this call, there are many people who have been doing this work for a very long time. So I extend a deep bow and a generous bow to you. How do we transform these emotions that feel like a kind of bottomless pit? How do we transform them into the work of nonviolent, peaceful action? So the approach that I will offer tonight comes from the work of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh and the Plum Village community. And I will share about my own personal journey. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh, or Thai, teacher as he's often called, came of age in the Vietnam War. And he coined this term, engaged Buddhism. So at the time of the Vietnam War, the monks and nuns there had an important choice to make. They could have stayed safely in the monastery, praying for the poor people who were being bombed upon. But they made a decision to leave the halls of the monastery and to support the people in the streets. Of course, praying for the people is right action, is a beautiful action. And they prayed and they acted together. So what I'm pointing to here is that the community of Plum Village that was founded by Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh knows a lot about how to do both things, hold suffering and act for social good. And so I'll be sharing with you the 25 years that I've spent with, and I've had the great honor to spend with this extraordinary man, Thich Nhat Hanh, and the Plum Village community. So the roadmap for today will begin with a bit of a centering moment, and then we'll just catch our breath and just sit for maybe about three or 4 minutes, not long, just to regather ourselves. So I'm hoping that Rachel or Annie or Adriana will invite the bell and lead us through. So we'll begin and we'll end with a little bit of sitting. And then I'll share a bit of a Dharma talk, and we'll have some time for Q&A, ending about 8:30. But please feel free to stay for as long or as little as you like. We're delighted to have you here. So with that, to begin with a centering moment. Rachel, the first slide, please. So welcome to my kitchen. Welcome to the center of my home. What you're looking at is called an ofrenda. This is an offering, an altar, a homage to the living and to the dead. It's a way of remembering the people in our lives. And so my ofrenda is bits and pieces of a shell or a stone, affirmations, the ancestors and descendants, a bottle of white rum. Couldn't have an ofrenda without a bottle of white rum. So much has happened in the last few months. In the United States, more than 122,000 people have died from the effects of COVID-19. Worldwide, more than 470,000 people have died from COVID-19. Millions of people have been left unemployed. We have seen the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Rashawn Hughes, and I could go on, leading to national and worldwide protests to speak out against the injustice, racial injustice in particular, and police violence against Black people. So it seems fitting to start here, to start with the ofrenda, to pay tribute to those of us, our loved ones, who have helped us to make meaning in the world, who have given us life, who have brought us into this world. So let's go back to gallery view, please. So I'd like to offer you just a moment to consider an ancestor, a descendant, someone in your life who has supported you, who has helped given you life, someone meaningful. And say that person's name silently to yourself. Thank you. So, in addition to honoring the ancestors, the land. So I'd like to turn to a land acknowledgement. Rachel, the next slide, please. It seems fitting to recognize the people who have lived and inhabited the land that we now live upon. This speaks to their sovereignty and to our own consciousness, to our aspiration to create just, equitable relationships with people. And so, again, I would invite us to speak the name of the land on which we are situated. And if we know the name of the people, to say that as well, and to say that silently to yourself, the land and the name of the people. Thank you. Let's go to gallery view again. And finally, as a centering moment, I'd like to turn to you with this question. There are many places you could be right now, but you're here. So I ask you, what is it that you said yes to when you registered to attend this session? So let's take the next 30 seconds and with a pen and paper in hand or some writing device, whatever, or allowing the question to wash over you, what is it that you actually said yes to when you registered for this session? And again, take a moment and read that, speak that silently to yourself. Hold that as an aspiration for the duration of this session. And we will return to this at the end of the session. So I'd like to, again, extend a centering moment to allow us to pause and to breathe. So coming into a posture that feels comfortable for you, standing, sitting, lying down, whatever you want, check in with what is useful for you, and then do that. That would be a novel thing to do, to actually do what feels right. So to do that. And taking just a couple, 3 maybe cleansing breaths, connecting with the in-breath and connecting with the out-breath. And feeling the sense of your own in-breath and the completion of your own out-breath. Notice what it feels like to breathe naturally with the air coming in and the air going out. And maybe feeling whatever is arising for you, whether that's a sense of contentment with your own breathing, or distraction, or anxiety, or whatever the flavor is, allowing the breath to hold that. And again, taking a cleansing breath. And maybe we could listen to just one sound of the bell and transition. Thank you, Annie. So again, a deep gratitude to Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh and the Plum Village community, and actually also to the Vietnamese people who have produced a Thich Nhat Hanh. So I want to, whenever I speak of other people's culture, express a sense of cultural humility. There's a lot that I don't know. So again, I'll be speaking from my personal experience to begin with. And since it is about my personal experience, this is obviously a work in progress. I'm not checking in as an expert here. I'm on a learning journey. And Thai, or Thich Nhat Hanh, has said, that our life is our message. And the Quakers have a saying that to let your life speak, let it shine. So I'll be offering my own personal experiences around this. And because I'm speaking from a historical perspective, from a Buddhist point of view, the view of self, there's also, of course, the perspective of non-self. There's the historical elements of self, and then there's the ultimate dimension of self, where there is no birth and no death, no coming, no going, no after and before. So I want to begin by saying that I identify as female, as Afro-Cuban, a person who grew up in poverty in New York City. And just being able to kind of name some of these identities was really difficult for me. Growing up, I bought into this internalization of the white supremacist mindset, a mindset of perfectionism and a sense of urgency, a defensiveness, an assimilationist mindset, really wanting to set in, to fit in rather. So I straightened my hair. For years, I wore very conservative clothing. Again, all in an effort to fit in. And then in 1995, I had this watershed moment of meeting attending rather, a public talk given by Thich Nhat Hanh at the Riverside Church in Manhattan. And that was quite a turning point in my life. As you might suspect, Thich Nhat Hanh spoke about love and compassion. It was the opposite of everything that I knew and the way that I was living. And I walked out of the talk thinking, I don't know who that guy is, but he's nuts. You know, the world is not like that. But, you know, there was a seed or a kernel or something really touched me. And so I began to start practicing mindfulness meditation in the Plum Village tradition. Actually, I was a closet meditator. You know, as a lawyer, it was simply not acceptable at that time, 25 years ago, to be a meditator. I realize now that, you know, I was deeply enmeshed in this rigid fight, in flight or freeze mode. Actually, my whole social engagement network and system in my body, you know, that Stephen Porges talks about, that was totally shut down. I had, and still am challenged in how I form relationships with other people, and quite cut off from the wisdom of my own body. So even as I say all of this, even as I say that, I can feel that in my body and in my heart. And I turn to the Plum Village community for support and for help. And so about 7 years ago, I left the career that I had trained for all my life as a lobbyist and a lawyer, a job that paid the bills, but robbed me of a sense of my own humanness. And I was saying this to someone just today, that all the while when I was in my lawyer lobbyist job, people would say to me all the time, you know, gee, you don't seem like a lawyer to me. And I would say to myself, what the heck is the matter with her? You know, I just couldn't see that. So the transitioning, the becoming from type A lawyer lobbyist to Dharma teacher is not the job of one person. It takes many people. And so I have to recognize the people who supported me, the loved ones of my dear friend Kirsten Olsen and Karen Ehrlichman and many, many other people who helped me to redefine my values and success and so-called success and what that looks like. And so now my work is as a Dharma teacher, you know, cultivating happiness and sharing that with other people. So when I received the transmission of the lamp of wisdom in 2018 in Plum Village, France, there's a beautiful ceremony that happens, and the Dharma teacher to be offers a poem to Thich Nhat Hanh and the community. And then Thich Nhat Hanh and the community offer a poem back. So I haven't shared this with a group of people other than in the ordination, but I'd like to share the poem that I wrote to the community because it speaks to the transformation. The poems are called gathas. Gathas, they are ways of waking us up and bringing us back. So, ancestors, invoking winter, becoming spring, releasing the grip of suffering to a heart of compassion and boundless love. aspirations as vast as the ocean and wide as the sky. With her lap full of flowers, she surrenders to the Buddha's voice. So, how to fight without hating? As Black and brown people, marginalized people, we're in the fight of our life. The effects of COVID-19 are not equal. The effects are well documented. Actually, my friend Kirsten, I joke with her and we say, I'm the poster child for systemic racism. But we know that Black and brown people have been disproportionately affected, impacted by COVID-19. We are the essential workers. We are the mass incarcerated. We are those who have been affected by unequal employment opportunities, educational opportunities, housing opportunities. In other words, all of this is compounded by gross and disparate treatment of Blacks in particular, and compounded with police violence. So as a lawyer, I'm very interested in structure. Like, what is the structure behind all of this? And we do. We have a set of structures. They're codified, that is set into law through case law, through regulation, through executive order, through statutes. And this has created, of course, redlining and de facto segregation, which essentially has been outlawed, only to be substituted by de jure segregation. And then, of course, intergenerational poverty. There is the effects of explicit and implicit bias that feeds into this system like an underground aquifer. And on every measure, we are suffering. And yet there is an awakening happening. Even though some of us may feel a sense of overwhelm and inaction, we may be saying to ourselves, what can I do? How can I take action non-violently, peacefully? So all of this is really not theoretical for me. I wish I could say I have not personally had my own confrontation with police officers, but I have. And very recently, as recently as maybe a couple of years ago, stopped maybe 3 doors from my own house on my own street by a police officer who wanted to know, why am I on the street that I'm on? I happen to live in a leafy neighborhood. And so I know that the practice that I've been sharing with you, that we have been practicing together, of returning to our breathing, that's saved my life. Each and every time I've been confronted with police. So to just kind of pause and take that in for a moment, the systems and structures, it's real. So how do we hold all of this without being totally overwhelmed? How do we make sense of this? So I'd like to share the practice from the Plum Village tradition of selective watering. Selective watering. So in Buddhist psychology, the subconscious mind is likened to a storehouse like a barn that contains all kinds of seeds. And these seeds are like emotions. So there's the emotion of despair and anxiety and shame. And then there's the seed or emotion of warmth and delight and optimism. All of these seeds coexist. There's also cultural conditioning and social conditioning, as well as the assumptions and assessments and perceptions that help to activate these seeds. So for example, if you're cut off in traffic, the seed of anger, which might be dormant in the subconscious, gets riled up. If you have a lovely conversation with a friend, then the seed of maybe upliftment gets watered. If you live in fear of the police, the seed of anxiety gets activated. And so in the Plum Village tradition, we really learn how to notice, practice, take care of these seeds, how to strengthen the beneficial seeds, emotions, and how to allow the emotions that are not so beneficial for us in the moment to rest. And there are many, many practices that allow us to do that. So one beginning practice is the practice of stopping. And there's actually such a thing. It's called shamatha in the Pali, to stop. And Thai has said that this practice of stopping is actually a precondition, not a condition, a precondition to actually healing, is to practice stopping. And so how do we actually do that? How do we practice stopping when we're triggered or when we're really, really mad? So, no worries. Every day presents an opportunity to do that, right? So I'll just share with you what happened to me like just a couple of days ago. So usually in the morning, I go out for a walk and I often climb up the top of a big hill. So per usual, I'm walking, I climb up to the top of a big hill. I'm out of breath. I get up to the top. There's a development up there, right? And so this woman comes kind of running toward me with a leash. No dog, just a leash. So she says to me, "If you see the dog, it's mine." And so I said to her, I don't live here, kind of panting and out of breath. So she says to me, "Okay, bitch." Right. Yep. So I had the opportunity to practice stopping, calming. The old me, the old me would have wanted to pummel her, or, like, "How dare you," or something like that. But because I had practiced and have been practicing stopping for so long, it came automatic. And so I saw myself stop. I saw myself breathe. And I saw myself just holding that And I felt a sense of sovereignty over my own emotions, that I didn't have to respond in kind. Later that day, I actually offered her some metta, or loving kindness. Like, there must have been a lot going on for this person. So that's just a little tiny example of how handy this practice of stopping can be. So in stopping, it's not like this theoretical thing, you know. It's not like we're going to cut off all assessments and perceptions and belief. But we notice, okay, that whatever we're caught in, and give it a breath. So again, I'm not checking in as an expert here. I'm, deeply in practice. But maybe we could just practice this little bit of stopping right here and right now. It may come in handy. I don't know. You might climb up to the top of a big hill and find somebody who's irate with a leash and no dog. You never know. So shall we practice the art of stopping? And then we'll continue. So step one with stopping. Just allow yourself to relax for just a moment as best you can. Sitting or standing, lying down, it's all good. Eyes open, closed, screen on, screen off. And feeling the breath come in, actually feeling, not thinking about how the breath feels, but the tiniest bit. And allowing your awareness to really stay steady on that in-breath coming in, the fullness of the breath coming in, and then the fullness of the breath going out. So again, taking that full breath in as best you can, allowing the mind to rest just on this breath coming in and just on the breath going out. So thank you. So that's how we practice stopping. It might come in handy for you. So how do we handle these strong emotions, that come up, right? The person is up there at the top of a hill with a leash and no dog. So one of the things, again, that we've learned from this amazing teacher, and there are many, many other teachers, is to take good care. To take care of the emotion as it is arising. And that good care, that pausing, that allowing mindful awareness to come up, to hold the emotion, just as you would wrap a baby in a warm blanket, produces a kind of concentration, an inner concentration, an inner strength that then can lead to a kind of glimmer of insight. So we like to say that the application of mindfulness gives rise to concentration that then can give rise to insight. And insight is another word for wisdom. So we cannot do this alone, of course. We need to have friends along the way. And I love the term from the Celtic people and John O'Donoghue, Anam Cara. To have a spiritual friend is really important. And that means kasanga, a group of people who've got your back. And so partly too, it's about organizing our life in such a way to touch as much as we can these really beneficial seeds. And so the practice of stopping helps us to do that. The practice of relaxing, resting. Some people call it the body scan, or in the Plum Village tradition, we talk about lazy days. A day when we're not going to, we have work to do, but we put the work aside, because being lazy is much more important, and for many of us, that's a real practice. There's also what I like to call the soft no. People can ask a lot of us. And instead of like chopping off to say, no, I won't do it, but to say, I'm saying yes. The soft no is actually saying yes to something that's equally important, or maybe more important. And so none of this has to be 110%. If we did this even 50% or 40% of the time, that's moving in the right direction. We tend to think if I don't do this 110%, then I'm doomed for failure. So the beginning, to start, is what's important. I often like to talk, using the terms of the neuroscientists who talk about experience-dependent neuroplasticity. Right. Right, that's self-directed neuroplasticity, meaning that what we do, what we say, the company we keep, the food we eat, all of that, the books we read, the podcasts we listen to, all of that affects how we process our emotions, how we show up. So it's a work in progress. So this is about, taking very, very good care. So this is all about the emotions and how to handle the emotions, but there's another part of this, and that is action, right? So I've been talking about what do we do with the strong emotions that arise? And the breathing, the pausing, the shamatha, all of these things are about getting a handle on the strong emotions. But that's like part one. Part two is now we move into action. And as a lobbyist and lawyer, I'm reminded of the words of Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And he said that all politics is local. And so a lot of this is as local as us as individuals. We might say, well, I'm one person, what can I do? I don't know what I can do. This is systemic racism. It's structural, it's built in, there's codified with laws and statutes. Okay, so let's turn to the poets. And I love the words of William Stafford. And his poem, just a fragment of his poem, A Ritual to Read to One Another. And Rachel can place these words in the chat if you like, so that you can have them. So here's what this amazing poet, Stafford, has said. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. So I have a friend who volunteers at a local polling station. It is important for awake people to be awake. I have another friend who attends Black Lives Matter protests. It is important for awake people to be awake. I have a friend who writes soulful poetry. It is important for awake people to be awake. I have another friend who is in a reading group and studying systemic racism, books on systemic racism. It is important for awake people to be awake. I have other friends who watch movies like the movie 13 and then have a discussion. It is important for awake people to be awake. We each have a contribution. Our actions matter. And here I want to, lift up the words of John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, one of the heroes of the civil rights era. And Lewis was famous for saying, not all trouble is bad. Some trouble's good. And sometimes we have to get into good trouble. So what I'm pointing to in these peaceful, nonviolent action is very good trouble. To make a way from a way that doesn't exist. Actually, it was Vincent Harding, the Quaker and scholar, who said that we are citizens of a country that doesn't exist. That we are in the process of creating the country that we want to have. And we each have a role. And so we do this not only for ourselves, but we do this for the administration and other administrations. We do this for the people who don't even know about equity or justice. We do this for them. So I love these words from Kuan Yin, attributed, it's a beautiful poem. Kuan Yin, or Avalokiteshvara, is said to be the very essence and representation of deep compassion. And maybe Rachel, you could place this in the chat. So here's the prayer, at least it's a tiny fragment of the prayer. To those who cause agony to others, I give you the gift of free-flowing tears. To those who deny another's right to be, I remind you that the angels sang in celebration of you on the day of your birth. To those who see only division and separateness, I remind you that you are that a part is born only by dissecting the whole. So in the beginning of this session, way back then, I invited you to think about, what did you say yes to? Remember that? What did you say yes to when you registered for this session? So let's reconnect with that. What is it that came up as a yes in your body and mind? Let's take a moment. Take a look at that. Speak that to yourself. Say that silently to yourself again. This is a reminder of your great aspiration. So we are interconnected. Thich Nhat Hanh calls this interbeing. What happens to you affects me. What happens in Wuhan, China affects people in San Francisco. This is very real. We are all flowers. We're flowers in the garden of humanity. You cannot open a flower with a sledgehammer. So we need to move at a different speed. This is the speed of trust, the speed of love. So this is a path of how we might fight injustice without hating. So thank you for listening. I think we all probably need a good stretch. Yes, we need a good stretch. And then we'll have some chance for Q&A or any insights that people have and they'd like to share. I know that on this call, there are many people who have been doing a lot of this work. So perhaps we could want to stretch a little bit, whatever way feels comfortable for you.
So just technically for questions, if you have questions for Valerie, if you want to put those in the chat, or you could have the option to unmute to ask your question when she's ready for them. And I guess I'd just like to suggest that we focus on something that's meaningful, that could be a benefit to everyone here, and also taking advantage of Valerie's wisdom to really focus the question maybe for her. Thanks. Annie bowing out.
Adriana bowing in. Maybe it's better if you want to speak your question out loud. Just tell us that in the chat box or raise your hand, and then we can, I think we can call people, no, Annie? That's what we are gonna call people if someone wants to unmute themselves and read the questions that we see in the chat box. Thank you.
I'd also love to hear anyone who'd like to speak and on this topic, what you have discovered. We have a very, very rich community here and we can learn from each other.
So it looks like Augusta is asking to have the Gatha again. And I think, was that just the poem? I don't know if I heard a Gatha. And then I guess, so do you want to answer that?
Yeah, Valerie offered her lamp Gata. If she has the willingness, it would be lovely to get to hear her offer it again.
Yes, yes.
Yes, we can. Rachel could put that into the chat. And I believe you also have the poem that the community wrote back to me. So yes, a deep bow. Thank you.
And Annie bowing in. There's someone, Sharon has a question, so about seeds. So maybe Sharon could unmute and ask her question. Bowing out.
Thank you. Hi, Valerie. As you were talking, this notion of activating the seeds and then selective watering, I was reflecting on that as you were talking, and it occurred to me that an action that I could take, and I just wanted to check in with you and see if this is an application of what you were talking about. But it seems like we have a limited space, energy, focus on our seeds, and that selecting the ones that we will water after it's activated is important. So my question is, I've noticed when I read, say, articles about the administration, which I won't say I hate, but I loathe, because I don't like the concept of hate. But anyway, what I've realized is when I read the comments after those, say in the New York Times, it waters those seeds of loathing, which I want to not encourage. So would not watering them, i.e. stopping and not reading the comments under the guise of, oh, I want to hear what the, Susie Public thinks about this. Would that be an example of not watering a seed so that it will not take root and grow in our spirits? Oh, you're on mute.
There you go. Thank you for the question. So my short response is yes. That selective watering is just as it sounds. We need to be very selective about what we ingest. And so our teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, has often said that nothing survives without food, without nourishment, and that we're constantly absorbing and taking in, and then putting out, obviously. Some things we cannot choose, such as in the United States, you drive down the street, there's like advertisement. I've only been in a handful of places in the world where there's no advertisement in the street coming at a person. And so it's very important, especially now, because we are in a state of, at least my assessment is of kind of collective trauma, to be very careful about what we are ingesting and absorbing, and not just edible food, but we are ingesting and absorbing those comments, the comments of the people, their mindset. It's the mindset that then, the thinking that then leads to the acting that then goes into the typing that comes out on the paper that you then, or we then absorb. And this is the process. So it's very important. Now, it doesn't mean that we cut ourselves off from information. There has to be a balance. And this is where the skillfulness comes in, to know what is the soft no, when is enough, how much is enough, and to be cognizant and aware of the impact that the digesting and the reading of that material is having on the mind, the consciousness, and the body. So one of the things that I notice when I'm reading things like that is my heart begins to race a little bit faster. Now, I happen to come from a family where I have 3 brothers. One had a heart transplant, the other one died of chronic heart failure, and the other one is morbidly obese. So I'm very aware of the operation of my own heart. And so I notice not just my heart, but there's an inner gripping and tension that happens in my body just from reading the material. And so this really invites us into a kind of waking up to what's happening, and to then take skillful action. So that's probably a lot more than was needed. And I would love to hear the wisdom and others in the community, what you have found.
Thank you.
So, is that helpful?
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Someone else want to talk? Have a question? There is.
I think we have, the chat's a little crowded, but I think we have a couple of things. We have the question about how do we bring the 5 mindfulness trainings to the version from Arise to our local sanghas. And I'll see if Valerie has an answer, but I'll share that we read them the same way we read the usual 5 mindfulness trainings. We read them in the same way at our sangha on Monday night. So I don't know if Valerie has other ideas.
So I'm aware that some people may not have any idea what a mindfulness training is. So their teachings in the Plum Village tradition, they're called trainings around consumption, love, our perceptions, how to cultivate happiness within rather than actually generating happiness within a person's mind and body. So we actually train ourselves in some very specific ways of being in the world. And so recently, as so many things have been happening, we wrote a contemplation on these trainings in light of racial injustice and in light of the global pandemic. And they do not replace or supplant these original trainings, which carry the wisdom of our teacher and many, many other people. But they're designed to really address this very specific time that we are in now. So I hope that's useful. And I maybe at the end of this, those trainings could be the new paradigm, the contemplations could be placed on the website for anybody who wants them.
Great idea, thank you.
Yeah, do that, definitely.
So I'd love to hear, what you have done or said, or your insights about fighting injustice without hating.
We do have one more question. I don't know if Elizabeth wants to unmute and share or ask.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Thank you. I have to be honest and say I was a little distracted. I wasn't listening quite as much as I needed to when you answered the question that was asked. But so I'm interested in hearing. So as a white woman, I've been challenging myself to do things that are uncomfortable, such as I watched Ken Burns' Central Park 5. And as I hear the word select, like I want to quote, I want to protect, I almost want to protect myself from the pain. But I have to experience the pain if I'm going to understand. So selective is an interesting word. Like my mind tells me what to be selective about, and sometimes that's not very useful.
Well, this is a very complex question or a statement, and there's much that could be said. And Thich Nhat Hanh has provided a kind of direction for this in 4 words. No mud. No lotus. There you go. No mud, no lotus, right? So in the Plum Village tradition, suffering and happiness, joy, delight interconnect. Thich Nhat Hanh often said he would not want to live in a world where there was no suffering. I'm going to repeat that because just to make sure you got it. He would not want to live in a world where there was no suffering. Because if there was no suffering, he would not understand joy. And so the practice, at least in the Plum Village tradition, is to cultivate, to hold our suffering so tenderly, to transform it into compassion, into peace, into joy. And this takes time, it takes practice. It's a movement. And yet there's something also very important that you said about our capacity to tolerate discomfort. And how do we tolerate, how do we increase the bandwidth of our own discomfort? And so that begins by, and Stafford pointed the way, awake people need to be awake. And so we start where we're at. Perhaps it's a book, perhaps it's a movie, maybe it moves to a conversation. And then you might vote, or maybe you start working in a polling place. Everyone's actions makes a difference. You know, we, as a lobbyist, you know, I studied political science, and how is it that we get the leaders that we get? That doesn't come out of thin air. Yes, you could talk about the Electoral College. But I think it's really important that we recognize that we are not helpless, we are not a victim, and that we can act. We start where we are, we begin there, and we move forward. We hold the discomfort. And as we begin to hold that discomfort, to tolerate what feels almost intolerable, slowly the bandwidth, the capacity to hold that expands, gets easier, leads us to action, leads us into good trouble. So thank you for the question.
Valerie, this is Janice Jackson, and it's good to be with you tonight. I have to say, I really appreciate hearing your words. But I want to say, I've been outraged since I was in elementary school. You know, I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and have lived all over the country. And I have found, my background isn't in Buddhist teaching, though I've done a little bit, but my background is the Black church and Jesuit tradition. And what has been helpful for me is to turn to, in part, the arts. You know, when I think about the many Black poets and the incredible artists, but also to learn in the midst of chaos and pain, look for opportunity and look for moments of happiness. So I'm gonna give just one little example. I was driving down the street the other day, coming back from the grocery store, and I saw these two little girls standing on the corner holding signs. So I assumed they were gonna be protest signs. But when I got to them, they said, "Stay safe." Now, I drove by and I thought, no, I have to go back and say thank you. And so I rolled down my window and I said thank you. And I asked them what grade they were in, and they were in 4th and 7th grade. So when I feel discouraged, I think of those two little girls because they were doing something that may have appeared very small, but it changed my day. You know, and so I'm thinking about where are the small places where we can make the contribution. And the pause is one, but there are places where we have power and influence. And how do we use that when we feel those moments of outrage? So I always say prayer without action is a prayer not yet complete. So what's the action that we can take, small as well as large? So I thank you very much for your conversation tonight.
Deep bow, Janice. Janice is my teacher. Thank you. You know, I love it. I totally love it. And, you know, speaking of the Black church, I want to shout out to, you know, so many of these amazing leaders. And again, they've set the path for us. You know, they've said, it's that smallness, you know, it's that smallness that keeps us really constricted. It actually constricts the heart. It keeps us really, really small. So I'm not going to take an action. I'm not going to do anything because I'm frozen. I don't know what to do. I am just so small and so inhibited. Fear, right? The fear. And what I'm suggesting here is to play in a bigger space. The bigger space is love. The bigger space is peace. The bigger space is nonviolent action, whether that's looking at a film and having the conversation you've never had with anybody. That's way bigger space. And we are all up for that space. We can all do that. We can all do a version of that.
Thank you, Val. We have few comments and a question. I'm gonna go to the question and then we can go back and read the comments. But Robin is, sorry, I'm going to the question. Luan Fortune is asking, I am beginning to hold small groups in several settings for learning, reflection, and deep listening specific to racial equity. To where do you go for supervision and grow to be more present and masterful facilitators? Mm-hmm.
Janice, this is your time. Tell them about TEL.
So I would say one place is the organization that Valerie and I are a part of, Transformative Educational Leadership. I think it's .org, looking at some of these questions, but I would also suggest places like the National Equity Project, Race Forward, Teaching Tolerance. So there are a number of places you can go. While they will have contemplative practice in them, they may not be a Buddhist base, but those are a few places to start. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you. That will be great, Valerie and Janice, if you can share that with us and we can have those resources in the website also for people, if it's possible.
Right. Janice, if you want to send, or you can type something in the chat, and we'll get it on the website for sure. But yes, beginning with transformational educational leadership, the TEL organization, of which Janice and I don't know if Hector is still on, Hector Montenegro, also.
I'm here.
Yeah,
Okay.
Hector added it.
Okay, yeah. Hector, do you know any other place that you would recommend?
Well, I just typed in the telleadership.org, and that's,
Yeah.
the Tell Leadership. Yeah, that would be the main point that I would go to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And I think it's really important to get training. Again, things are changing so rapidly, and we are really, this is a time of this collective trauma on top of racialized trauma, on top of. So training is really important.
This is Annie bowing in. Can I share one thing on that that's just feels important to me, that we always make sure that we have some accountability outside of whiteness, because we can get very, we are insular in terms of our conditioning, that it's hard to see beyond that. And it feels important that any groups that are doing work on race have some kind of accountability to people, BIPOC, people of color. And also that we make sure that, people aren't being called on to do work for free. I just want to add that a little bit. Annie bowing out.
Thank you, Annie.
And this is Adriana bowing in, and if I can share something, because I have noticed that with white people and being part of that group, to really look at the people, to acknowledge the people who is not white, that are around us and that are helping us and are serving us, and not just in theoretical ways, but really in physical and ways, to really see the people who are around you, and to look at the eyes and to say, I'm looking at you, I know you are here and we are here. Thank you.
Adriana, I just want to bow deeply to that statement. For me, one of the fundamental injuries of racialized trauma is the dehumanization of Black people and marginalized people in general. And so whatever we can do, and we can do a lot, to remember the humanity, this is the humanity of the person, the dignity, the integrity, the wholeness of the person. This is truly critical. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Val. We have some other comments here, and if it's okay, I'm just gonna read it. Robin Cadwell is sharing, recently I had a fiery conversation among a few people on social media. I found it easier, also still challenged, to pause and breathe in this online conversation than I would if I were in person. But in person, there is body language that I am used to using to indicate I'm listening. Another comment here, you all can read them, but Claire Bettenhill is sharing, one good motto I have learned from teachers: expect and accept non-closure. I, as a white person, want a quick, comfortable fix. It's complex and unfolding.
Absolutely. So again, expanding the bandwidth to be able to hold and tolerate, I think is really, really important. Yeah, that, this is a lifetime of work, right? And the impossible is going to take a while. So we can settle back into this. It's going to take, it's the lifetime work. As my friend Kirsten says, as long as we're breathing, we're doing this work. And I'm just incredibly grateful that we are here together, that we've spent this time in this way. There's so many elements to the fieriness of rage. It's so seductive, right? There's almost like a white light. It's a flash. It's very seductive to go to rage and to go to outrage. And what, through that innocent question that came in the chat among 600 people, how to fight without hating, I've tried to offer a path, a way. It's not the only way, but this is a way. So I want to thank Annie, Adriana, Rachel, and all the people who contributed to this. I want to acknowledge the Plum Village community and Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, the countless people who have provided, the path for how to handle our own anger and hatred, and to still move forward to do the work of justice and peacemaking. So thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you so much, Valerie. That was just beautiful. It's just what my heart needed tonight. And I think other people probably feel the same way. So grateful. Shall we have a bell?
Please.
So from this evening together, and any healing energy that we may have created together, may we send that out into the world to share with all beings our boundless love and care, so that all beings everywhere may be safe and at ease and experiencing love and free from suffering and the root causes of suffering. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
you all.